So I am really happy to have you here. Alors,
So, without further ado, we have two speakers. Marini will talk about gender-based violence in schools in Morocco, which is a principal element to discuss. It's a problem in many countries, not only in Morocco. Just to provide you with figures, so a lot of girls are out of schools in the world, and these girls live through lots of hardships to join schools because of cultural norms. I think that starts to justify it, to be used as justification for discrimination. Another point, as we've seen this morning, according to the studies, the schools are not secure and safe for schools. I visited some schools in Morocco and abroad where we see the toilets and so on, the spaces, vital spaces are so insecure, unsafe for girls, especially let alone the girls that have to take long roads to arrive to schools. It's crucial that security or safety for schools are important. Not only the Ministry of National Education, but to work on other facets to provide this safety. That's why it's so principle to handle this issue, how to remove these gender-based stereotypes and these discriminations that happen through the curricula and at the behavior level of teachers and the behaviors of the school staffs, how the school can become so positive to curb this gender-based discrimination. The floor is yours, Amina. Go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, moderator, dear friend, dear Najat. I'm so happy to see you again. It's a crucial topic that, according to me, and in my view, this is crucial. So we have the plan. It goes this way. I have an introduction, some elements that have entitled elements to apprehend this. That means we have lots of disposition to deal with this issue. Some of the elements about the prevalence and challenges we're facing in this regard, and also the forms or types of violence that occur in the schools. What are the consequences and some patterns to provide protected schools for boys and girls against gender-based violence? And then I'll give you a contextualized conclusion. What is the gender-based violence? It's designated so to refer to acts that have been forwarded to women or girls because they are feminine, that's all. And that causes physical sufferances, the physical and psychological, be it in their personal lives or public lives as well. So gender-based violence, as Najat just mentioned, happens through legitimate stereotypes. What has happened in reality, as you all know, humanity is made of women and men. These men and women are black or what, no matter what their social status, geographical ethnicity. So it's a kind of human diversity. The first article of the Human Rights Declaration, or Universal Human Rights Declaration, said that all humans, no matter what their origin is, they are subject to rights and dignity. And the Constitution of our country also bans all the types of discrimination based on gender or sex in particular. What has happened that throughout history and based on biological natural differences, men and women, these differences are neutral according to nature, and they provide equal grounds because they belong to the nature, and they've been translated into social discrimination in a hierarchical relationship that reflects the social dimensions, the attributions and roles that have been assigned to the sexes are different and differentiated through different methods. Men are more intelligent, women are soft, the quality heart, the quality of the heart is different from men and women. The roles, the productive roles of women, and the reproductive dimension of women, and this hierarchical relationship in family that happen in families or society at large. These social differentiations have been they are a construct, and they've been translated into victimization of women throughout the world, here and beyond.
Bien sûr, il s'agit.
Of course, it doesn't have to do with only men and women. It doesn't mean that all men are violent. It's a system, it's the patriarchal system that has created this hierarchy of status and roles, an assigned role to men and women. It's the role of schools to start with. Violence towards women are reflected on girls because of stereotypes, and I believe we have to mention this. Before the Lioness of Atlas have achieved good result in the World Cup, we said women are not made for soccer or playing football. Women and football, that's contradictory according to the stereotypes, and we believe that stereotype has been broken. Stereotypes constitute kinds of prejudgment, ideas that justify violence towards women, not only discrimination, but they lead to dehumanizing behaviors. About some things about the prevalence of this violence is the HCP, the High Commission for Statistics, that have conducted certain studies and in 2019. So we have some results here to share with you. We have 13 million women aged from 13 to 74, 84% of women have reported being victims once in their lives. So 57% of more women from 15 to 74 have been gender-based violence, according to the survey. I'm going to link this to the context because I don't have much time between the violence, the family or the domestic violence that happens in the household. So it's at 58%. It's about 60%. This domestic violence has an impact on children, of course. If it's those children that we find in schools later on, and we'll be talking about this interconnection of violence. So the children suffering from violence, we've talked about this. I'm going to mention that violence during the trainees constitute 27% of violence cases that have been suffered by women, and 31% in the rural areas, 27% in the urban areas, and 32% in the rural areas. So considering this prevalence, the HCP has come up with this prevalence in violating human rights of women. 28% of women, married women, or divorced or separated, less than 35 years old, have suffered from violence at the age of 18. As you know, the early marriage and so on are causes of all of that, and they can be turned into violence. What happens during this study? HCP has defined the venues of the trainings and learning as a manifestation of the violence at the heart of the education system. And it has evolved throughout the last decades. So women are subject to this social, psychological, and physical violence. Fear or worry about being victims to this violence hinders their achievements in schools. There are different contexts. So training and studying venues violence is also impacting women, and also in their environment. Women suffer a lot. For example, those who take the road or commute to school, they suffer while commuting. So the administrative staff, the teachers, or other alien individuals around the school area or environment or surroundings cause violence against women. So there are some challenges. There are a lot of challenges regarding violence in school in general terms, but we are concerned about the amount of this violence in the school themselves. The concept itself is not well integrated. It's not apprehended, and how to deal with this phenomenon in general terms in the schools. There are lots of data to share with you about the amount of violence in schools. The reliable information emanating from HCP. They cover high school and junior high school and the university. This means that these existing studies, we have few information and statistics about the violence regarding the primary school. So the information that we have doesn't integrate gender as a basis for analysis. So we have created one paragraph to talk about this element. It's not a tool that is used in a transversal manner to analyze all the impact and effects on girls. The acts of gender-based violence are not recognized and being reported. That's the difference between gender-based violence and what is normal violence. Some types of violence are more reported than others, as you all know. The cases reported by the media, especially the sexual harassment regarding women or girls, when it has to do with rape in particular, and those victims benefit from support to talk about their cases. So we have here the forms of violence. Sexual violence, sexual harassment, sexual violence is number one. In all the contexts, schools and the training centers or vocation centers are the places and the venues where this occurs more on women. 10 out of 1,000 girls have been raped in the rural areas. When we say women, we talk about women or girls, we mean the feminine sex. So that justifies talking about gender-based violence, and a lot of women are victims or fall prey to these types of violence. We have the rural areas, for example, as you can see, we have 15, 19 years old. We have the high school as well, where this occurs. Sexual violence touches upon another vulnerable category, which are disabled girls. HCP, 20 out of so disabled girls are also victims to all of this. We have psychological violence as well, which is important. Is a marking element regarding this victim girls at the level of the high school, all levels of high school, especially the ones in rural areas. In rural areas, they constitute 5% more than the urban areas. The physical violence is less spread than the other types of violence, namely psychological and verbal. So we have the higher levels have more victims to all of this. 2.7% of women suffer in the superior cycles of education. So HCP and their data demonstrate that when women, the younger the girls, they are more prey to this violence. They are victims of violence when they are younger, implicitly. So the data, according to the data of the HCP, 22% of feminine students, and the students, they have reported that they've been victims to violence through their classmates, by their classmates and so on. 62% are from comrades, and 30% are from teachers, and 28% are from the aliens. Or there was one study that have been carried out between 2016 and 2019, working on an academic sample about the group of causes that have been accumulated. So, and they are sorted out in this way: boy to boy, 43%, as you can see, girl to girl, 5%, but boy to girl, 52%. More than half of the violence that occurs and have been recorded are perpetrated by boys against girls. The consequences, as you can see, and take into account all that's been said, we take the whole big image and the repercussions that occur on these students, serious consequences, psychological, physical, mental health issues. With the speaker this morning has demonstrated this facet and the extension of this issue and some of the damage that is caused by violence, especially on mental health, and also the impact on their educational career, lower participation, and so on. So there are those constitute the major impacts of this violence. Also, the early marriage plays a major role, and it leads to violence. A lot of things have been debated and talked about. Gender-based violence impacts both boys and girls in the long run. So the youngsters, the young boys who have been witnesses, for example, they grow up and they become more prone to reproduce the same behaviors they saw as a model, because they're instilled in their minds. There's the curriculum that we know, there's the hidden agenda or curriculum of the schools and so on. It's instilled in their subconscious mind, and it continues, and they can reproduce. They are prone to reproduce the same behaviors because they've seen them as acceptable. The girls also accept that. There's a tendency to accept this type of domestic and family violence. There's a reproduction, intergenerational reproduction of this violence. Concerning the accepting these types of violence, HCP has provided some statistics about this type of prevalence, and they've conducted surveys on conceptions of the Moroccan perception of these types of violence. And I don't have time to talk about this in details, but the result of this survey concerning perception, and has demonstrated that there's not much debate about this issue in the Moroccan society. There are more women than men affirm that the husband has the right to blame the wife for any mistake. Even women, in a less extent, consider that they have that right. So knowing, being aware of law, and resort to the legal system is lower. The HCP tells us that the more than half of men and women don't know that a law exists that deals with violence against women. Women know more the associations that work in combating or curbing these types of violence. They have no state-based or state-based institution to help them in this direction. You have the report available for dealing with the violence against women. I invite you to read it and consult it. It's interesting. Amongst the conclusions of ACP after the domestic context, so the training and vocational venues are more violent for women and girls in particular, and the school environment is also preoccupying, and the rates of violence there are preoccupying. This is more worrying in the rural areas. So the institutional factors have to be explained, and the causes of the roots of this violence should be explained to get to know them swiftly. So we are under the umbrella of an educational system, and we work at the High Council for Higher Council for Education, Training and Scientific Research, and we try to contribute as much as we can to protect boys and girls from all types of violence, even the domestic violence. So we always say that our system has to be centralized, or to focus on the on society as a whole without any discrimination, and to curb this gender-based violence in accordance with the needs. I can imagine that when we think about reform, we have to bear in mind that the children, boys and girls, are the center, at the heart of our preoccupations, and along with other players surrounding us. All that's been said this morning is great, and I greet the children from here taking part here with us. So we had the children, but they are well kept, and they kept the good surprise. It was a great surprise, and I share with you these elements to mobilize these students to be stakeholders in all of this through activities to deal with stereotypes and try to find appropriate and adaptable solutions. It's a crucial question to create one of the laws that would protect them at the end of the day, Najat. So the right to participation, and I opened the bracket here to say that the right to participate is the new update from the Convention of the Human Rights, the right to live and protection as well. So they are entitled to all of this, to be inclusive with high quality and mobilize all the children. There's a documentary about UNICEF that handles schools. That was a kind of book of specifications for any school to be worthy of the students. We have to valorize and capitalize the public elements that have been created as dispositions. Even though these elements require from us to be punctual, there's no visual vision, no general vision that encourages the good practices for teaching in the school environment with involving association. It's a true development this direction. The Moroccan school celebrates the 15 days of 15 days campaign devoted for violence in general. We try to integrate all these elements and get it across to the children in a holistic manner. For more sustainability, we have to deal with this question of gender-based violence by promoting the culture of equality between the sexes, by implementing the education reform, which is important and which will meet our expectation to come up with a pedagogical system on equal terms and open new horizons for the school. In the media, we try to include all of this, and the plan of 2023-2024 strategic plan, we try to capitalize on the reports and share it with all the stakeholders. There are reports underway emanating or published by the Council to deal with such elements by creating permanent commissions or committees to deal with this issue. We're going to move now to the contextualization of the issue. I'm so happy and thrilled to be amongst you today. While the Moroccan context witnesses some structuring reforms. On the one hand, there's the reform of our educational system based on the strategic vision of 2015-2030, and there's a framework law, and there's a structuring reform in relation to the theme we're dealing with today that has to do with the family charter and so on and forth. Violence is cross venues, and it happens in all the spaces, and there are certain dispositions in the family code or charter that organizes the relationship between men and women, husband and wife. And there's the minors' marriage, which is one of the dispositions of one of the stipulation of the family code and charter. We are at this moment discussing this, where we have to work on this huge project or reforming projects, and we have to know where to start. We have to start by mentalities. We are in a in a vicious circle that keeps turning. While the policies create more ground for this, we work in accordance with the Constitution, which stipulates all of these things, and that has to be reflected on the mentalities. While mentalities change through this, the efforts of the socialization institutions, especially the school socializing institution, more and more society will be more and more ready for the upcoming consistent reforms at the legislative level. We are at a historic moment in our country where two huge reforms are taking place and would lead to the improvement, substantial improvements, namely significant status of women, and promote their position in the family, in the school, and of course following the principle of parity and equality for all. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Amina. I'm not going to summarize everything. Everything has been explained. What is capital here is to take into account the context of reform, into account the reform of the education system and the family charter, family code. We take into account all the actions that have been stipulated by this study. We have to make of the school not only one element, but not only gender-based violence and its existence, but it's develop tools, parallel tools, to make a smooth transition to create a just society, equitable, inclusive, and protecting.
And here we will discuss about brief overview. Sorry, I know that you have a lot of things to do regarding, the evidence and the effective evidence strategies that show that they work regarding preventing violence against children and in schools. Over to you, Ramya.
Thank you so much, Najat, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me, and to the distinguished members of the audience. It's been a real delight to listen to the debates and to listen to the young people. I'm from India, and I know we have very similar debates and passionate debates, and we all feel the urgency of finding solutions to this very pervasive global problem. I'm from India, as I said, and I work for the UNICEF Office of Research, which is based in Italy. And one of the things we've been doing over the last few years is trying to accumulate what is the evidence. What do we know about what's effective and what works? Because ultimately, as Najat said this morning, it's a call to action. We can discuss the issues, we're all very familiar with them, but what do we do about it? So one of the things I'll present very briefly today is really that overview of what we're learning. I don't have time to go into the details, but I'll try and be as effective as I can, because Najat is watching me. So just very quickly to contextualize, we've been talking about Morocco, but please let me remind you that globally this is an issue of huge proportions. When we look at the global data, the comparable data, it's usually collected from the Global School Health Survey. It usually collects data on peer violence. We don't have globally comparable data on many other aspects of violence within schools. So we have global data that collects every 3 to 5 years information on bullying, on physical fights, and on physical attacks, where it may not be necessarily students who are attacking students, but students who are being attacked maybe by others. And this is the global data that we have seen collected. Morocco is one of the countries for which data is collected. I think there are about 96 countries for which data are available. The last was in 2016. So just to give you a little bit of data, and of course there are multiple sources, so not to go into detail, but we've already looked at the fact that globally we have a lot of countries where this is prevalent, and there are large numbers of children. Just to point out that about 732 million children live in countries where we do not prohibit corporal punishment at school. So corporal punishment at school is still very much accepted as part of the schooling environment, and there is no prohibition in at least in multiple countries, and 700 children don't have this protection. And I think this is a very sobering fact to remember when we talk about the school environment. And if you look at the MENA region broadly, both Middle East and North Africa, we also see large numbers of children who are bullied and who live in countries where corporal punishment is not prohibited. fully. And I just want to show a quick figure. The North Africa figure is the bottom, the third from the left. You can see that it's larger. When you look at Middle East and North Africa, both regions have very large numbers compared to, I think Sub-Saharan Africa is equivalent, but we have a much larger problem in this part of the world based on this global comparable data in bullying, in physical fights, as well as in physical attacks. So, these are concerns. We've also seen in Morocco, based on the 2016 data, that the trends in bullying are showing a sort of an increase between 2006 and 2016. The good thing about global school health survey data is it can show you trends. So in this 10-year period, we're actually seeing bullying reporting going up, but we do see that physical fights have not gone up and that physical attacks have shown some decline. So, this is a phenomenon that has many dynamics. And I just want to say that when we talk about what do we do about this, we have to recognize 3 factors broadly that our programs, our solutions need to address. Many of these have already been mentioned, so I'll just speak very briefly to them. One is the issue of normalization, which Madam Amina spoke to just now, which is that we know that violence is normalized as a way of self-expression, as a way of exerting control, as a way of also differentiating ourselves from others. So whether it's by gender, whether it's by ability, whether it's by your ethnic group or your migration status, we know that violence is used very effectively to differentiate, and children learn this very early. And they learn it because they're also in environments. So one of the points is the social context within which our schools function. We know that is very, very powerful, and the schools have to really, really fight every day to create an alternative space to the violence that's normalized even around schools. And then, of course, children come from families. I think Yusuf said it very, very eloquently, where children are exposed to violence. So the school is really something, has to really take on when we're doing programs with schools, it has to take on all of this. And I think we need to keep that in mind, because what I'm about to present to you are the levels of action where we need to be really working to address this program, these issues. And today, mostly, I will talk about program interventions, because when we look at the global evidence, it's mostly about programs that are being tried in schools across the world to try and address this. Those are the programs that have been best evaluated. Earlier today in the discussion, a colleague in the audience said, but where are the evaluations in Morocco? This is something, what I'm going to present is where countries where there have been evaluations. And the quality of evaluations are varied, so I cannot come here and tell you there are 5 magic bullets that are going to solve the problem. But what I can tell you is really what are we learning from all of this evidence. Efforts to change school environments are more complex. We don't really have very many evaluations for them, but I will speak a little bit to the whole school kind of approach. And of course, we have to look at national commitments and laws and policies, and I will speak for like 1 minute on that. So let me just jump through. So when we look at program strategies to make schools violence-free, we see that most program strategies try to do one of several things, or sometimes they're overlapping. One is they try to develop knowledge and life skills amongst the school populations, age appropriate for different ages. And this is a way of just trying to build capacities within children to be aware of violence, to understand that violence is not a kind of appropriate social behavior, and so on. So there are programs that have been designed in many countries to try and do this. There are efforts in some programs, not many, that have been trying to look at building the safe environments, in some cases using community mobilization. I think we have a very strong example from South Africa on that has been evaluated. A third component are programs building on Madame Amina's presentation, addressing the harmful gender norms and values. And there are many examples of programs around the world where within schools there are efforts to really get children, boys and girls, to talk about gender norms. There are efforts within schools in many parts of the world to look at providing psychosocial support, particularly in conflict areas, which is really through things like post-traumatic stress disorder, cognitive behavior therapies. So, there's a wide menu of options that we could consider in a country like Morocco, depending on where we see the problem. And then, of course, there are also efforts increasingly, not very many, to really take all of this together and say, how do we embed it so that the whole school is transformed? And I will speak a little bit to that. So I won't go into this, but just to say that there are many examples. The problem with the evidence is that sometimes these programs are very small, they teach, they're pilots, so we don't really know if they really work across many large populations, but there are efforts, for example, and I will just highlight one in the interest of time. So after-school programs. I think I heard someone talk about school clubs here in Morocco. So if you look at after-school clubs in programs in Latin America, where we have a often pervasive community culture of violence, there are many efforts that have tried using orchestras and sport to try and keep children who are at risk, children who are displaying aggressive behaviors, to try and engage them in different ways to build up their skills. And one very powerful example is from Colombia, where a multi-component program really worked to promote pro-social behaviors, but also to prevent aggression. And what is really interesting is that this was a universal program. It targeted all the children that were there through citizenship education, and they found huge impacts in bringing down the violent behaviors over a long period of time amongst children. But what was really interesting also is that the children whose parents were committed to the program had much better results than children whose parents were not involved in the program. But this is one example of a very successful program which has shown results over time, and they also found it to be quite cost effective. So when we're looking for models that can be adapted or taken into different countries, I think these are some programs that have very powerful resonance. So what were the mechanisms of impact? And I think this is important, more than describing lots of programs. Most of these studies show that there are multiple things that need to happen in an environment for change, for violent behaviors to come down, for children to really learn to protect themselves, and to really have an environment of safety. One is really working on group dynamics and team building, so getting children to really work together through clubs, through many other mechanisms. But none of these work on their own, because what you also need are mechanisms to help children learn how to regulate themselves and monitor themselves. When they feel angry, how do they regulate themselves? Giving them the tools to cope, because they're still children and they're learning, and they often come from an environment where they're being exposed to all kinds of stress factors. So stress release, teaching children how to release stress in a healthy way. Personal mentoring for children who have problems, to ensure there are people who are going to mentor children. Someone mentioned, I think, in the morning on adult supervision, increasing the availability of adult supervisors to be there, to be around and watching the dynamics and helping to intervene when necessary. Increasing human capital, so really giving children the sense that they're building skills. So the examples of sports and music are also examples of increasing skills, gives children hope and a positive sense of self. And that's extremely helpful, and that links to positive aspirations. And then really including the family in the program. As I said, there's very clear evidence that just targeting children alone, it's unfair to children, because children are looked after and cared for by others and adults, and we need to make sure that those adults are also valuing the same things and are able to support. Another set of examples, and I know Najat is going to look at me in 1 minute, but really we have a lot of examples of very positive programs that are promoting gender equality in diverse school settings, and they are from countries, Mexico, India, Kenya, Pakistan, and I've included in the presentation a whole reference list, and I don't have time to go into all of that. But getting children to learn to be bystanders, how do you intervene in a healthy way when you see violence in the school? There are very positive examples how our children can be equipped to do that, to learn to intervene in a healthy and safe way when they see violence taking place between their peers. Positive attitudes related to gender. There are many, many powerful examples of this. So I don't have time to go into them, and we can discuss them in the workshops. But the other issue to talk about is we talk about online violence, and I just want to say that everything I've read about online violence is it doesn't need always a special program. It can be integrated because a lot of the digital world intersects with the offline context in the school. It's not a separate space. So the online space reflects what's also going on. Of course, it accelerates and amplifies and therefore is a bigger threat. But in general, we need to understand and respond to online in relation for children to understand its links to their offline environment. And I just want to say that again, all of the evidence points, when you want to improve this situation for children, we have to create a positive relationship with the parents. There has to be parental monitoring, so we have to educate the parents and equip them. And we also have to look at teachers and looking at the enforcement of school rules. Very often schools have on paper a rule against the use of digital, but actually they don't monitor and they don't enforce. And by the way, I'm from Italy and my children are in a school where that is equally true, where it's not enforced. So we really have to, all of these general violence prevention mechanisms, which are about equipping the children and their families, will be effective also for online violence. So just to sort of say that we don't need to have separate programs for this and that. We need to integrate all of these measures and create a package which puts children at the center. So just to wrap up a little bit, but just to say that what we've learned from program interventions, we need multi-component programs. No single component program is going to be enough. We need to design from the beginning all of these components. I think Najat has been talking about it from the beginning, about integrated programs, but we need multi-component programs. We need to strengthen the school environment, that's been said. Using group-based programs, let's not single out individual children and make them feel that they are at fault. They're also learning, so we need group-based programs where peers can support peers. We, of course, have to be age sensitive. There are programs that go for younger children and older children. They cannot be the same, and we need to really look at that. And we need to, someone said it this morning beautifully, the school staff are central. There are examples in the literature of programs which were fantastic, but the school staff did not support them because they were never involved in them from the beginning. Many of the programs that I've talked about or I've read about have involved professionals coming from outside and delivering something outside, but not engaging the schools and the teachers. So really making the schools and the teachers central, very critical. Many of the programs are often adapted from other countries, and we need to make sure they adapt to context. And we've got to have the systems own them. And I've kind of seen in many countries that a lot of these, the impetus for violence prevention is not coming from the education system. It's coming from child protection or it's coming from somewhere else. But the education system has to take ownership. And therefore, it's such a pleasure to be here today with members of the Higher Council and, you know, within a very strongly education-focused audience here. A reminder, schools are positive spaces for children. They can play a role, so it's not just about fixing a problem, but it's really, you know, getting ahead of the problem. Schools are positive spaces, and they provide the right infrastructure for children. They can also implement targeted interventions. Children are there every day. So, you know, we don't need to think of something outside of school in other hours. They need to be part because they see children every day and they can monitor. And of course, they can influence the development trajectories of our children. So even if children are falling behind because of violence, there can be actions taken to really put them back on trajectory. So really, it's not a negative issue of schools having to fix a problem, but really a positive observation that schools must play a role because they can help address this problem, you know, in a societal sense. So really re-emphasizing that point. Just to say briefly on the whole school environment, we are seeing from Uganda a real effort to try and bring all stakeholders together to talk about violence prevention. I would urge you all to read about it. It's the Good Schools Toolkit that's been now scaled up by the Ugandan government. Really, through a process of really engaging different stakeholders, they have started talking about violence, parents, communities, school teachers, school headmasters and principals and so on. And they take place within the school. So we have got a few good models, also from Chile and India, though I think those are not as well studied. And the Uganda example is extremely well understood for its very positive impacts. And what they do is they don't just follow on the program, but they focus on policies and procedures and processes. So really intense, but that's the change it's going to take. You know, having a 1 hour program once a week is not going to make the difference. We've got to really integrate it into the school. So I was going to say something briefly about national laws, but I think the point has been made is that we are not protecting our children through our national laws and policies. Laws and policies by themselves aren't sufficient. Everyone talked about implementation earlier. But, and just to say that this, to me, we can keep doing evaluations as necessary, but I think what people said about the implementation research is critical. You can have the best design program. How it's implemented is going to be different. So my recommendation would be for countries that are trying to build the evidence on what works, let's build a learning approach so that we're learning alongside and not alongside evaluations, but we're also doing learning research where we're accompanying professionals and we're accompanying teachers and making sure they're getting the support to do this well. Because when they do this well, it really has a huge impact for children. Thank you very much.
Okay, switch off. Thank you, Ramya. Thank you. You did it well, quick, but very, very. I just want to highlight 2 points. What is important for me is really school, and the school setting and the educational setting are not here only to fix the problem, but really the role as a key player, you know, in moving forward, in better preventing and responding to violence. So it's an actor also of building, you know, not only school environment that it's safe, but more wider. This is one. The other thing I really love is not copying past. It's not because we are going to have many programs that will be shown that we are going to copy past. What is important is really to take into account the approach adopted and to see how we can really implement it, but not, you know, without all the key actors, including the school staff, because this is a problem of ownership. And the last point is the evaluation process, because the evaluation process is not only measuring the impact, but also is learning process, how we can to have a kind of self-criticism, how we can evolve, because the situation is evolving. And the last but not the least, really working with children and also supporting all the peer initiatives. So many thanks. I try to summarize.
We have less time and we have to finish at 1:45. If you're not hungry, we'll carry on. So if you have any questions, go ahead. Please be brief and to the point. Go ahead. The floor is yours if you have any questions. Speak up, please. We can't hear you. Speak up. You need a microphone? Get closer to the tables where microphones are available. Who has a microphone? Yes. Educational greetings to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Amin Al-Marini, whom I happened to meet in different meetings, and who worked with me a lot, because the topic I'm going to handle, we talked at under the umbrella of the Beiti Association. Amina Baji, the president of the Moroccan Association for Dialogue and Reconciliation, the executive director of the National Federation Against Drugs and the Use of Drugs, and the member of the National Council for Civic Society, Civic Education. So this morning we talked a lot, and a lot of speakers talked about violence and its causes. And from my position as practitioner, I see that the main factor of this violence is drugs. Drugs have led this to the explosion of this violence around or at the schools. The associations start to create listening centers in educational institutions with the help of psychological social workers. We work on the parental education and the training of teachers and so on. Robot is a pioneer in this. We have 24 institutions that we work at, and we've reaped good results, the fruit of our work. And as I said, Amin Al-Marini was the founding. We co-founded together in 2004 through a huge effort, mutual huge effort. She gave me a lot of work, and even the deceased, may God bless him, Bilfaqih Angela Tawfiq as well, worked with me. I will never forget their encouragement and their interest in what I did, and their belief in the work they were conducting. Miss Marini attended with me meetings at the Ministry of Education a lot of times in order to combat this phenomenon of violence. I haven't started yet. I've just started. Let me speak. So Miss Rqiya is my professor in humanities. She was my professor for years. But I think she doesn't remember me. It's been so long that I raised my hand without being given the floor. To combat this violence, we have to create these centers in schools. When we talk about the violence, the child or the student doesn't bring this violence with him or with her. This violence is created by social factors, and we emphasize the psychological factors. There are some students who have mental problems and they go to schools. There are students who have schizophrenia. And that violence increases at school through pressure. Our property is to create specialists, psychological specialists, to help them. Social workers as well should be put to the disposal of those schools and give them and provide them this opportunity to monitor the students. We are lucky to have all this position, and we have partnership with the Razi Hospital for mental health to take students there. And the students, for example, indulge in violence and they don't know why, if they are sick, and then they resort to drugs. They start to commit violence against their parents, and we recently start to see the phenomenon of violence against teachers. When we sit with these students, they were unaware when they committed such violence, especially against teachers, and that's why we have to monitor him or her. In the prison, we found student prisoners who came for no big reason, because they committed they made a big error, and they commit violence under the effect of drugs. So Professor Ramya talks about great points, is that our association works at the level of each school institution, by creating clubs, for writing clubs, right, theater clubs, play clubs, and so on. So the school space has to be loved by the students for them to come and enjoy their time at school. So we don't take them responsible for this. We take the Ministry of Education on parents. The parents and the ministry are responsible for the violence committed by the students. Thank you very much for your time. Please, quickly, please.
شكرا.
Thank you very much for this valuable presentation from which we benefited a lot. I wanted to start by Simone de Beauvoir quote. We are not women, we become so. We're not born as ladies, but we become women. Through the process of socialization in the family, we are indoctrinated and educated to distinguish between men and women through behavior and so on and forth. And then we go to school, and we were already conditioned by this violence. When we say that we adopt this feature of violence, but it's implied in its danger, and it's not easy to eradicate this violence. So what is required from us is that this holistic approach should be deployed. All the stakeholders have to take part in of this by calling upon everybody to come up with collective efforts in sensitizing everybody about the danger of this phenomenon in schools in particular, and in a family, in the street, clubs, and so on and forth. The second point that my sister talks about, the necessity to activate the role of these listening, post-listening centers and the different structures that have been created for this purpose to sensitize everybody and promote and starts campaigns of sensitizing and awareness raising campaigns in this direction. Of course, my sister talked about the evaluation of programs. We talk about this facet. We mean the creation of these listening centers who is conducting these awareness raising campaigns, because we have resistant mentalities. Some work against or pretend to do so. They may not be fully convinced, and their practice may be contradictory. I would add one more thing, is that the types of violence, I'll talk about types of violence now. We talked about one type of violence that we don't talk. So the legal violence. Professor Marie talks about the family charter, and when it stipulates there's an implicit violence, which is, for example, interrupting the others. So interruption is another type of violence, and also the violence of women against women. Please. Just one remark here, with much respect to the professor who intervened. So the opening statements talked, and they opened the floor. You have to open the floor for everybody to take the floor. I'm an inspector, pedagogical inspector. Excuse me for the speed. The issue, this has always been in the news. It's a theme that we did. The results, the studies, the alarming results have been published, and the process of socializing of individuals. And here, the matter we deal with the students are crucial, and we have to deal with this situation as responsible ones. I would like to see one girl who to provide her witness, her testimony, but unfortunately one girl didn't take the floor. So we'd like to have joint commitments to work on this. So we have to develop practical conducts to deploy in the classrooms, because we're talking about schools, and everything has to be started at schools. The inspectors attending here with us, an association, would like you to share with us some models we can deploy, we can transplant in classes. Number one, how to help the teachers to detect verbal or non-verbal signs of and also self-containment or self-centeredness. What is it? When we observe that in students, and also the retardedness, if it's symptomatic or not, and any types of revolting and caring vindictive ideas, not only detect them, but also it would be better to anticipate what these categories would do, and how this impacts their daily behaviors in the classroom, and how this impacts their learning ability. The second question, how to help the teachers in a generic term, how to build a pedagogical project that integrates. That means put it into practice and translate this into practice in the classroom by creating pedagogical scenarios, and create pedagogical projects for the classroom to connect them to the huge project of the institution, school institution, and the umbrella of the Ministry of Education, and break them down into graspable activities to sensitize those students. So the awareness raising is important. Excuse me, lady, I have only 2 minutes. Collaboration, sharing, and so self-esteem are all important elements. So one mother reported that to me. Her child tells her who's going to go through this calamity, who's going to go through this hardship for one more day. So the sufferance that they suffer. So students. So one marginalized lady and her son who's expressing themselves, and I spoke for them now, because students consider school as a hardship.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the presentation. One more thing I'd like to mention, I'm Joanna Erat. I work at the headquarters of UNESCO. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here amongst you. I was hit by something that is reflected in the data. It's great to collect this data. When we have a problem, we may not be able to respond without such data available. And we have data about the violence in schools, the data reflecting all those types of violence, and we have violence against women and girls in particular. I'd like to know how to encourage the integration of the gender-based elements in the data collection in schools. That's what's missing in the in this morning's report. It's an excellent report. I congratulate the authors. They were able to get across a message to us, and there's a lack of this sexual. It's sensitive also. It also contains sensitive information about sexual violence in schools, and we're here to support you and help you if there's anything we can integrate in the SIEGE system and how to serve this educational system and move forward.
Thank you. Greetings to you all. Rabia Salhi, a member of the Moroccan Association of the High School Inspectors and retired from the Ministry of National Education. I would like to deal with deep problems, deep issues. The phenomenon needs a contextual approach because we work in a context. The school is everybody's responsibility. The school deals with the pedagogical, educational side, but among the missions, there are other missions, other tasks that preoccupies educational stakeholders. So I want to define the concept of responsibility, authority, and development, and commitment. And I'd like to go back to what Mrs. Amina Marini said, reforms. The reform of the family code, Mudawana investment code, and developmental model. If we were to put together all of these things, there would be no political, social, or economic developments without the development of the human elements whose initial development is the school. So in implementation, there is a problem when we implement the development criteria. Herein lies the question. Today's Mudawana, that is the family code, and I thank Mrs. Amina for having raised the question. The family code is a family code where, even though I'm retired, I'm still thinking as a member of the ministry. The family should raise the slogan of the family and the school for the improvement of the school services. The children of divorce is a violence. Underage marriage is a violence also. The child custody and its problems is also a violence. All of these phenomena are problems that impact negatively learning inside schools. Sexual harassment inside the schools and inside the family. And herein, I'd like to point out to the impunity at all levels which make such things spread. Why am I talking about this? Because the impacts of all of this is its impact on development, on the economy, on politics, on culture, because what the child carries, what he carries in his childhood is what he is going to carry as an adult. We suffer from all problems in all sectors. All the suggestions put forward by the speakers before me, they mentioned some certain tasks that the teacher can't carry out. There is a psychologist, there is a social workers, listening centers, also other sectors, human resources that should be devoted with adequate profiles for the functions. When there is no adequate profile for the functions and tasks, I'm talking about the initial education, that is primary school, and even before that. Two more requests for the floor, that's all. I apologize. I'm going to use the 2 minutes you gave me. I'm a professor of psychology, specialist in the protection of children at the School of Educational Science, and I'm president of the Center of Protection for the Protection of Children. For studies are valuable, but studies in Morocco do not help much. We did a lot of them. We have a lot of problems, even in diagnosis. We have problems in execution, implementation of public policies for the protection of children and for safe, secure schools. I'm going to talk about two things of fundamental importance in protection against violence. We need to focus on P, parental positive programs. It doesn't exist. As to human resources, training and training and training. Why? We're talking about listening centers and mediation cells. I was a member of parliament in the political discussion about education. We talked, there are certain centers for mediation supervised by specialists, experts, not anybody. For the psychological and educational support team that exists, the lady mentioned something, if he is not trained and a specialist, he's not going to solve school problems. We need to choose the right profile, the real psychologist training. If we don't have them in numbers, there could be probably 5 in each regional academy. Mediation not only in violence, but in learning problems and disorders, and also in things that lead to violence. So these things and training, I believe this should start. We have been talking about such issues for 20 years now. It's high time to implement now. Thank you. The last request for the floor. And then we move to the children. Thank you. Thank you to those who have organized this meeting. In a nutshell, probably my request for the floor will be just in the form of questions, and I'm going to start from the point here where you started in your opening address. I am afraid that this meeting will be repeated in 4 or 5 years, as we did 4 other meetings before. This is the question now. Why? The question maybe is an old, new question, which is the model of the society we want. Do we agree on which model of society we want? Do we agree on it in this country? Meaning, do we want a model that is entrenched in cities and in the countryside, and we work through it and build alternatives, or start a new models that is universal, human rights, and work? We shouldn't go in 2 speeds that would lead to the blockage of any program eventually. This is on one side. On the other side, when we talk about violence in school environment, I'm always talking about the inputs of this conference, which is knowledge, politics. And when we talk about violence in school environments, we all know this environment is a complex environment. There is the teacher, there is the student teacher, the institution, the environment, proximity, and all of these. There is a interactive relationship between all of these elements, all these components. I believe we need to deepen the analysis in this interaction between these different elements. Would be an input. Third point, when we talk about the concept of violence, you talked about violence, but I believe we stopped at about the the direct level of violence, that is physical violence and so on. This is a component, important also. However, you mentioned that 1 minute about health care facilities. You find there violence, but if there are now health facilities for women in schools also, does it lead to violence? Passageways for people with limited mobility, if they don't exist, would it lead to violence? All of these points would need and enrich our discussion. Thank you. Shema will take the floor. First, I would like to thank you for this opportunity as children to participate in this international conference. What I would like to say, as the chairperson said, that is about human rights. Sometimes the first factor, fundamental factor in the cause of violence are drugs, which pushes the child to commit acts of violence. Probably this could come from the conditions and situations these children live in their families and in their close environment. So it's the environment that impacts negatively children and would push them to resort to violence. In school environment, the child finds himself, this is the way that would lead him to express what he feels. Thank you. Thank you. Amina. Thank you, Najat. Thank you to all the person who took the floor. We are discussing. We are not just question and answer. I would like to make 2-3 clarifications. First, I would like to tell you, dear lady, it's true. I deplore the fact that many studies that deal with violence against children or school violence does not integrate the gender approach. Even sometimes we find in the introduction we're interested in girls and so on. We take the gender question as if it were data that are divided by sex. Well, here are the boys, here are the girls. But we need the gender approach as a tool, an analysis tool, as it should be. It would be interesting to do some work together on a similar issue. I have 2 points I would like to add. For the role of the teachers, educators, I believe it's a critical role. But in these questions, I'm speaking out of experience. The teachers, professors need to know their role. That is, how to detect violence and so on, how to detect sufferings. They should know their role, and they should know where their role ends, because sometimes there are other people's roles which are not his role. This is a holistic approach. He knows when he should call upon other people who are well equipped than him, better equipped than him, to accompany the children. Another point in the training of teachers. When we talk about the role of children in the development of these values of equality, tolerance, these beautiful values that we have always been talking about, we should know in their training, this shouldn't be just education on citizenship, education on human rights, the education on... We need to adopt a pedagogy for the equality. It's a pedagogy of equality. It's a pedagogy of human rights. It goes into the context of the act itself. Here, the teacher doesn't educate on. Another point, that is law and schools. Those in my generation at the time of the reform of the Family Code 2004, they were talking about how the change and amendment of the law would impact the schools. Remember, this was the beginning of the reform. And the conceptors of school textbooks and those people responsible received specifications, amended specifications. They said for 2005 you need to include principles of equality and human rights. You know how to change an amendment of law impacts the schools, as it was the case for the Marrakesh Declaration for the fighting or battling or fighting violence against women, for instance, such as underage marriage of girls. We see how the change in laws impacts and influences the school, but our schools in themselves, this is a study that should be done, is always waiting for change that should come from its environment. It's as if it sees its role as dealing with reality as it is, not as an active party, an active stakeholder that carries and holds change. This is a debate, but it's an example of the changes of the law, especially those dealing with women. That is, when they happen, they would leave an impact on schools. One last thing, why do we talk a lot and we do very little? We act very little. Why is this problem? Why is this fear that Najat brought it from New York with her? That is, you took it and you brought it back. That is, we don't want to have this as another conference, international conference, in which we have lost a lot of money, time, and effort. And then we're going to go back and talk about the same issues. I believe we are before issues that require change, that is, radical change. And we are afraid of change. We are afraid of change because it destabilizes us from the top of the pyramid till the bottom of the pyramid. We are before problematics that requires managing change, how we manage transformation, because transformation transforms us or destabilizes us. That's why we see, even for the reform of our educational system, there are reforms, but there are things that still haven't happened yet. Why? The fundamental issues and strategic issues, we haven't been able to implement them. I believe the debate should be on this. Why are we afraid of change? Even our school doesn't educate on the culture of change. It encourages more, that is, repetition, change, copying. This is what I want to say. While pending change, the floor is yours, ma'am.
I mean, I just want to say it's fascinating listening to these debates because, as Najat knows, you talk about violence prevention, it's everything. You know, you have to take on everything. And as you were saying, Madam Amina, it can be overwhelming. But I just want to point to the fact that we do have examples where positive change is seen. So let's not be pessimistic, let's be optimistic. There are great models, they've been well studied, they can be adapted, we can learn from them. So I think we're at a good moment to build on this opportunity for change. And I do think that what this conference has got right is, you know, violence is complex, but you only need to listen to the children and they make it very simple. So that's my final observation. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis désolée si j'ai...
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we have other sessions pending. In any way, enjoy your lunch. Lunch will be short. It will be a pleasure to see you again. Thank you.